I'd like to invite our Rahayu and our other panel discussion participants up here. We have John Livingston of Verve and Duncan Greatwood of Zage coming up. And Sid's walking around with a microphone. If you want to ask any questions, again, I encourage you to ask questions. And as far as you being you're a good public speaker. And I'm just glad we got users up here to talk. You know, it is so hard. Really, seriously. It's hard to get users up here to talk about cybersecurity. I don't like to brag, but I think we do the best job of getting users up here. I've been to a lot of cybersecurity conferences. It's really tough to see an end user get up there and talk about some of the issues and successes that they've had in cybersecurity. So I'm just grateful that we have this here this week. I'm grateful to the users and to the sponsors because they're the ones that really brought these users in and helped us out. So really, thanks to Zage and Verve for doing that. Before we start the discussion, I'd like to have maybe first Duncan, and then John give us a couple of words about where they're from and what they do. So why don't we start with you, Duncan?
Hey, my little brother's called John, so I was called Junkin all my childhood. So
good, I don't feel so bad now.
I'm kind of used to that. Hey, I'm Duncan Greatwood, CEO of Zage. Thank you for all joining us here today. In just a few words, what Zage does is stop attacks in OT. Not simply detect them, not simply segment them, but actually block them and stop them. And we do that whilst giving people the access that they do need. So making access easier, whether it's local access or remote or for an application or a human. We try not just to be a eat your spinach cyber company. We actually make people's lives, working lives better as well. But we're the first wave really of a new kind of OT cyber company that is here not just to detect or monitor or assess, important though those things definitely are, but actually to stop the attacks before they can damage your systems. Simple as that.
That's good. Thanks, Duncan. John?
Sure. So I'm John Livingston. I'm the CEO of Verve. Verve as a company has been around for about 30 years. I may have mentioned this in our prior discussions. Started as a control system engineering firm, so actually designing control systems. And so our software is built off of that experience and knowledge, et cetera. And essentially, we bring our services, our historical services capability as an engineering firm, and bridging those over into security, along with our software platform that Leah described a little bit. What we're trying to do is essentially to allow customers to easily manage the OT security in their environment, right? So I think Sid has some articles about OT security management. Essentially, we are an OTSM platform, bringing all that data into one place to allow you to manage and ensure the security that you planned to be in place is there, and if not, to remediate it and keep it up to date. So that's what we do.
Thanks, John. I think we have a question from the audience to start off, so let's go.
Yeah, Mark Duck with Shell.
Questions for you guys.
Yeah, question for Leah. The asset inventory. So we are actually doing that now. You know, we've been dealing with spreadsheets and so forth in the past, but it's always been a very difficult problem for us. You know, our OT architectures, networks, whatever, they're set up in a way that it's sometimes difficult to sort of put a box in the environment and say scan and find everything, right? There's always reasons why there's some proprietary network over here with a bunch of controllers on it. We can't see that from an IP point of view. You know, so we document that with spreadsheets, you know, update the main database manually. You know, there's all these compromises to having a nice, clean, scanned environment. You've got 100% picture. So did you have any of those kinds of challenges, or what percentage of your actual OT footprint are you actually able to inventory? I mean, down to like IP-based, controllers, DCS controllers, PLCs, et cetera. That's the question.
We have about 98%. There are some small areas that are segmented off that unless we put a reporting server over into that area, we don't have reporting in. But mostly it's in our lab areas or areas that we want to keep separate.
Essentially, just to cover.
I mean, that's good. Thank you.
The software will discover all those assets. It uses the native protocols. We don't listen like a network tap would. We literally go to all those assets and we find them. The only thing we can't do is if it's literally like islanded, right? There's no connectivity to it, then you're not going to see it, right? But as long as there's some form of connectivity, we'll find it.
Anybody else want to comment?
Well, let me ask a real specific question. Can you inventory Yokogawa VNet IP controllers?
Yes, sir. We have a driver for those. Yep.
Okay, good. That's
Yep.
Well, but the in the way we implement VNet IP, it's on it's essentially isolated behind the Windows layer. So how would you get to it?
Probably a longer discussion, but basically going through various backplanes to get to those isolated devices using the protocols that you would use to manage those assets.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey,
Probably you guys have to deal with the same.
yeah, I mean, these guys are more specialists in this area than we are, but I could offer to make your problem about 1,000,000 times worse, kind of like this. Once you want to impose control, then you actually want to understand how things are interacting with each other as well. So not just here's a list of my devices, but this device talks to that system, this device talks to that system, this piece of software needs to access that system. And the best assessment tools will actually help you with those things as well, because then you can start to have real cybersecurity policy that says, oh yeah, only this historian is allowed to talk to this piece of the SCADA stack. Only this HMI is not allowed to go and spread malware over to that HMI over there. So there's actually that additional dimension as well. As I say, making your problem perhaps a little harder than it already is. But beyond device inventory, there's also kind of interaction inventory as well.
Do we have another question?
Oh, you don't have to, but
Don't be shy. You don't get an opportunity like this every day to ask users about their cybersecurity experience. So I do have a few questions here. We've spoken about automating certain tasks in cybersecurity this week. And I know, Leah, you mentioned automating some of the aspects of the assessment that you did. Can we talk about some of the benefits of automating in some areas where you're automating these tasks in cybersecurity and maybe some of the challenges that go along with it? Because I personally feel there's a lot of opportunities to automate a lot of this kind of heavy lifting stuff that we have to do to implement these solutions. So I'd like to hear your perspectives on that.
So the benefits really are that you lessen the amount of time that it takes in order to gather the data. That's my main benefit. So I am responsible for vulnerability management, which is a huge impact for me. So when we are going through and looking and seeing what's going on in the environment, waiting for people to come back and talk to us about what they have set up, it's almost too late. And ensuring that we have everything at a glance and having a dashboard that I can look at definitely helps me from a threat intelligence standpoint, in that we are constantly evaluating where we're at and if there's anything else going on in our environment. What Verve does for me is if somebody plugs something into the OT environment on their network that's not supposed to be there, it alerts us. So we didn't have that before. Before, what would happen is somebody would plug in something or install a new software, like they wanted to have some radio station playing in their control center. And so they installed it, but we got alerted, and we're like, no, you can't have that in there. Sorry. But having the automation in place helps us where we didn't have any insight. We now have ultimate insight. And will we be able to improve and create a better view for ourselves later going on? Absolutely. Does it make us, impregnable? Absolutely not. But it does give us something that we never had before, which is an overview and an ability to pull out the information at a glance by pushing a few buttons and saying, this is what we need. And it gives the site the ability to understand where they're at risk and the things that they need to do to shore up their environment and help us maintain the best security possible, so that we don't have to worry about having somebody come in and release our chemicals anywhere in the environment and create a hazard that we definitely don't want to happen.
Yeah, and I think
Thanks.
for us, definitely all of those things. I think having information, the amount of information that we have now versus what we used to before we had any of these tools in place, I think has been sort of a godsend, especially in the area of OT. And the other thing with our cybersecurity journey is that fundamentally people don't like us. Like whenever we put out principles like don't do this, don't do that, the first reaction we get is, really guys, like we don't have enough stuff to worry about. And it's the same kind of reaction that we had in the OT environment when we started implementing a lot of the things around cybersecurity. And fundamentally what we also wanted to do with being able to automate some of the key things that we needed to have in place for those controls to work was to minimize the impact to the people who had to run our OT sites, right? So the idea was that if we could automate much of that work, there could be a specialized team that handled, we have an OT, an OTCO team, an OT cyber operations team that's dedicated to that, but it's a very small focused team, and for the most part, our teams on the ground in our OT sites do their day jobs, and that's it, right? So the automation takes off a lot of the load from them to have to monitor and make sure. All they have to do is just not stick a USB stick into a port. But that in the areas of OS patch delivery and assessment prior to delivery, that's automated for us, and that's one of the big pieces of the puzzle for us from a cybersecurity standpoint. Setting that up was something that we had to do manually, right? But once it was in place, it's something that's automated that we can monitor from a distance and be able to ensure that it's done in a timely manner. Our backups, for the most part, are automated, except for areas where we cannot physically pull that information and need to do it in a manual manner, which we do. Our asset inventory is also automated to a degree, and that's something we do through passive monitoring. So it's something that we've been trying to do with the least amount of disruption to operations as possible. So again, wanting to make sure that whatever it is that we put into place did in fact apply the controls that are required to keep the OT environment safe, and to lessen that burden on the people who already have a very tough job of having to run our sites in the first place.
So we're not there yet, but the ability to do automated patching is also something that we're looking at using the Verve tool. Granted, we don't do a lot of patching. We all know that OT environments don't patch on a regular basis. If they patch once a year, you're really lucky. So we require it. We actually require that they patch twice a year, and that if there's any critical CVE that they have to do right away as well. So as we're going through and monitoring everything, we want to be able to set up the patches for them for the sites to release as they're ready. And Verve gives us that opportunity. Our sites aren't ready for it yet. They are very worried about doing so. So we are in the process of creating the operations ability for them to be able to automate patching for themselves, working with the vendors when they're down. But at any time, if they want to be able to do this, they don't have to wait for us. We can queue the patches up for them. We can identify that they need to be done. And then if the site has some downtime, they don't have to wait for the patch cycle as long as they realize what's going on. And we have the validated patches from the vendors that they can deploy. So that's one of the benefits of creating automation.
Yeah, it's definitely not a turnkey process. It takes time. It's definitely
Yeah,
a multi-year
yeah.
thing. So.
We're big believers of automating what you can. It makes a lot of sense as long as it doesn't impact, plant production. Obviously, we don't want unplanned downtime or anything like that. But I think there's a lot of opportunities to automate stuff in cybersecurity, just like we saw in the world of process automation with, the OPAF initiative, and it just happens with ExxonMobil. I mean, there's so many ways we can automate these things that we spend a lot of time kind of doing this rote, repetitive stuff that could probably be automated. So, do we have any other questions here?
How about from me?
Sure,
If I
yeah.
can, unless somebody else wants to. Oh,
And we got another one over here,
I'll
too.
get to you, Michelle. I'll get to you, Michelle. You just thought of one. All right. Now, I have two questions. One was, Rahayu, you mentioned, you were talking about that you have a SOC in your organization, but you also emphasize very much the separation of IT and OT. I happen to be a proponent for doing something to try to use IT as much as possible, to really integrate it. I mean, there's obviously places you don't, there's places that you do, particularly to deal with some of the resource issues. So I'm just wondering, you have a SOC, and that SOC is taking care of both IT and OT, am I correct?
That's correct, yeah. We were faster to enable from an IT side, definitely. And I think part of what we call the real-time OT project that I was mentioning before is actually that, to create that visibility in a centralized location. But the idea it wasn't about taking the two environments and again, integrating them necessarily. It was just being able to create that visibility that was one big picture for us to be able to see how the threats may actually cascade from one environment to another. So yes, our SOC does actually maintain visibility on both IT and OT sites.
And then I assume that in your SOC too, that one of the things I find personally is that the OT groups don't necessarily have all the expertise they need. And so it's almost like an escalated tier system of response.
That's
and at
correct,
some point,
yes.
I mean, some companies, BASF just left, but I know whenever I heard a presentation by them a couple years ago, they had a very nice escalation system, but it eventually got up to their IT people. I mean, sometimes you just need IT people that have expertise in certain things to be able to help you. But you are doing that, I'm assuming.
We do have what we call the OT cyber operations team, which very specifically looks at the cybersecurity for our OT environments. And that team is part of our SOC. And so there is a capability that purely looks at our network as a whole, and then the capability that actually focuses on threats within our OT landscape as well.
Okay.
Yep.
Then my second question is more for Lee, well, for both, I would say. And that was the comment that came up that everybody was talking about automatic patching. Mm-hmm. And I know that's been a problem for years. I appreciate it as much as any. I'm an old automation. I mean, I appreciate the problems. But one thing I've seen lately that I just am more interested in, or I find interest is, you know, in the networking equipment these days, I see more and more things in there to be able to do virtual patching, in the sense that you're essentially blocking the malware, blocking things that you figure out that this, you know you have a vulnerability in an endpoint device. There may be a way to detect that and block it. You know what kind of an attack you're going to get. But so instead of putting it into the device, which maybe cannot support it, you can't take it down, you can still put it into the firewalls or something like that to deal with it. I'm just wondering if you're doing anything about that, because, yeah, that's always been a big problem. You have these vulnerabilities just sitting there. You know you already got a lot of problems, and now you have to live with the fact that they're there. And I know even if you have Zage, and Zage keeps everybody out, but if somebody gets in, they're going to exploit that. And you're going to. So I just wonder if you're taking advantage of that in any way. I just know suppliers are providing that.
So we do monthly patching on our networks, and we don't give our OT environments an opportunity to delay that in any way. We ensure that we don't have any external penetration into our environments, and that is one of the things that we have to ensure, even at the risk of not having them connected to our corporate environment for production. Yep. So yes and no. Yes, we are. Yes, we are patching. No, it may not necessarily be virtual patching, but it is automated patching that happens on a monthly basis, regardless of what is going on in the production environment.
And when you say that, you're saying making patches to the networking equipment, or patches
Yes.
in? Does everybody understand what I'm talking about? I mean, some of the networking companies, or the firewalls and that,
Yep.
they'll say now, you know, you can do detection of malware and things in the firewalls. And so I'm not saying everybody would do that. I'm just curious if you're doing that. And so.
We have similar activity, but we also have active vulnerability management activities on a monthly basis as well. I can't go into too much detail.
Yeah, okay. All right, anyhow, that
Those
was
things
my
do
question.
happen. Let's just leave it at that. Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, we got a
I'm going
question
to
over
skip you
here.
for a minute.
go
Rob.
ahead.
I'm gonna go over here, then I'll be
Oh,
right back.
we have another comment from Duncan here.
Yeah, I could see our questioner was getting ready for me to leap down his throat on this whole thing here. So let me just add a couple of things. The approach with virtual patching is totally a valid thing to try and do, but it can also just be a part of a more general access control policy. There are equipment you cannot patch, so you're never going to be in a situation where you can always have the endpoints be perfectly secure. But if you control access, even if the attackers are on the network already, even if they're inside the firewall, then that's when the access control really comes into its own. And if the malware is trying to inject itself, whether the system is capable of recognizing the malware or not, if the malware is not authorized to make that access, then it can be stopped. And so that applies to 0 days as well as to known vulnerabilities. And combine that with the regular and rigorous patching that gets to as much coverage as you reasonably can, and you're kind of in a reasonably safe situation. You can also contain the attack, so if it does get inside one box, it doesn't have to go to the next 1,000 boxes across your operation as well. So thank you. I think question's been waiting for a little while, so we should let them.
Oh, no problems. Sid knows me very well, and he knows that I'm going to ask questions, but this time I was stumped to ask a question. Full disclosure, my name is Michelle Balderson. I am from a vendor, Atorio, cyber risk management platform. And so we're very similar to that of Verve, but I wanted to ask the question of the end user customers. But from the virtual patching perspective, I want to go there first. This is that I spent the last 19 years at Fortinet, which is one of the vendors that does virtual patching. I've never seen a customer deploy virtual patching in a live environment, and from the perspective of active blocking. What virtual patching is really used for is visibility, to be able to get to other tools like SIM and SOARs, to be able to then make decisions at human level decisions from the perspective of how you deal with the infection, because it's what you want is visibility to what's happening within the environment. Relative to the tools, I'm very interested in seeing what kind of derivative value you've given, that the tool deployments have given to other departments within your organization, like your governance, risk, and compliance departments. Are they using the tools? And then relative to the other distributed value, derivative value would be from the perspective of insurance and dealing with your finance departments. Have you had reduction in insurance, or you have the ability of being able to get insurance because you now have these tools in place? I'm very intrigued. And John, it's nice to see you in person.
It's a great question.
Go first. You want me to go?
John,
Who wants to go first?
Okay, I'll take the insurance question first. So, our insurance company did request that we have an understanding and an oversight into our OT environment. That was one of the things that they gave us a negative rating on prior to our investigating and implementing the assessment for an automated tool. Now, they didn't require we have an automated tool. They just wanted to know that we had an oversight into our environment and that we had a good process for understanding what was there. Our audit team asks for regularly the same documentation, the same format from every site. And our DCS engineers spend many hours gathering that information for them. We've seen a more rapid response to the audit team, so it cuts down the amount of time required for an audit, so that's a benefit. And then this is our internal audit, by the way. So, and then we also have seen a decrease in the DCS engineers' response for that. So when they tell me that they are not spending as much time on gathering information for the audit team, I told them, great, you can now plan that time for doing patching. So they didn't like that comment, but I keep telling them that we want to make sure that we stay up to date as much as we possibly can. The engineers are overworked. There's no doubt about it. Security is not one of the things that comes to the forefront of what a DCS engineer is required to do, but it is also one of the things that they are required to do. So hopefully that answered
Yep.
part of your question.
Yeah, I totally agree with our audits and the forms we fill out for cyber insurance feel very similar. I think the idea is visibility is definitely something that they want us to confirm that we have in the event of any sort of incident, that our incident response protocols are backed up with information from either environment, whether it's IT or OT. And for us, especially in the region, I think cyber insurance there's been an influx, I think, of it. So the insurance companies have been significantly more demanding in terms of the things that we are able to provide to them. So most definitely, I think that has helped us secure much better coverage for insurance. I think it's helped us to prove to our audit teams that certain things work very well. And in areas where there are gaps, that our reporting that we do have available is able to show them that, we are on the right track to get where we need to be. That said, I think because just the diversity of the not just the technology, but the businesses that we run, there will be different requirements across the business, which I think from a reporting standpoint introduces a level of complexity that we've just had to work through. There's no choice really otherwise. But yeah, most definitely, I think just having the tooling in place has definitely helped those conversations move forward as smoothly as they can in those situations. So.
Procurement also actually kind of likes the fact that they don't have to go chase down
true.
everybody for licensing. We can now run a report and say, how many Microsoft server licenses do we need in the environment? Because I'm responsible for IT and OT as far as cybersecurity is concerned. And so on our IT side, we have all that kind of automated already. But now that we're looking at our OT environment, which was traditionally always kind of a black hole as far as what it is we have, we just had to rely on the engineers, and we generally were overbuying licenses because we had to make sure that we were covered in case we were audited. Now we can say, this is what we need and this is what we're truing up to.
Excellent. Anybody else want to comment before we move on? I think we have another question here.
Yeah, Mark Deck again with Shell. This is a question for Zage. So I learned a little bit about the product yesterday evening when I stopped by the booth, but I'm curious. It sounds similar to another vendor's solution that uses host identity protocol and software-defined networking to basically establish this overlay mesh that I think you've mentioned. Can you explain a little bit more about this overlay mesh, maybe how it works, what technology is used to do that? But then secondly, once this is implemented, what additional skill sets are needed to support and troubleshoot that?
Sure. The Zage Mesh deliberately avoids kind of inventing new stuff that people have to implement in their endpoints, whether that's new network protocols or anything else. So it is literally an overlay that sits on top of that 30-year-old PLC or the existing network equipment that you may have or whatever else. It also allows us to operate locally in the event that a local site is disconnected from the center, so it's not kind of referring back to central proofs of authority, but holding the proof authority locally in the mesh. In terms of skill set, perhaps it sounds like a glib answer, but I would say that you need less skill after you've deployed than you needed before you had deployed. And the reason is because of the complexity, and going back to the automation question, the manual configuration that previously has been required across complex firewall rules, jump box configurations, workstation configurations, VPN setups, et cetera. All of that patchwork of things being used for access can be brought together under this umbrella for the mesh, and then the mesh will automate those things. If you need a secure tunnel from A to B, you don't have to go and hand configure that anymore. The mesh will just create one for you on the fly. If you need a workstation account, the mesh can go and create that for you on the fly and delete it again once you don't need it anymore. So, obviously there are, every new tool is a new tool that people get familiar with, but it actually does make people's lives simpler, even to the end user where they can access everything through a web browser instead of needing special clients on their laptop or whatever else they might need.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're and I'm not super familiar with these hyperscaler technologies that these data centers use, but it sounds like you're using some technologies along those lines where you can programmatically provision resources or configure nodes.
That's right. Yeah.
Network nodes.
That's right. Yeah.
So can you confirm if you're actually using like host identity protocol or software-defined networking or something similar to that?
We kind of use all of those things. Since the environments that we're targeting are so diverse, we kind of have to spread the gamut from using stellar distributed ledger technologies down to Modbus unencrypted, no password devices and everything in between. That's part of the kind of zen of Zage, if you like, is to sort of accept that reality of what's actually in the field and to try and cover from left to right of all the different pieces that need protecting.
Thank you.
You bet.
Can I revisit the how automation helps our business partners as well?
Absolutely.
So also what happens is that I know that our business partners have a tough time getting funding for technical debt. So now they can produce a report that actually tells their management what is in their environment and how it is aging, with the backing from cybersecurity saying, yes, we need to get those XP systems out of our environment if we could possibly do that. Or those 2008 servers you have out there, that's a problem for us. So we can definitely help support them in that, and that's just one of the things that I know that the teams struggle with whenever they're trying to improve upon the footprint in the environment and not getting the attention from the management that we would like them to have. So if we can produce that for them in an automated fashion, which we now can, that will help them with their business case.
Good point. That improved visibility provides justification for modernization if you need it. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Any other comments out there? Do we have another question?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, over here. I
Hi,
can't see 'cause this thing is
John
blinding.
Cusimano with Deloitte. Thank you very much for your presentations. My question is about vulnerability management and patching, because in my opinion, patching is one of the areas that really separates OT from IT, because it's not as simple as find vulnerability, patch vulnerability as it is in IT as it is in OT, because of course the operational consequences of pushing out a bad patch, patching a system that is not where it's not compatible, and all the other reasons that could be an issue. So it could be riskier to patch sometimes than to not patch. So the question that I have though is, what are you doing to review vulnerabilities, rationalize the decision-making process? Do I patch or not? Is it anything more sophisticated than, well, if it's a CVSS score greater than X, I will patch. If it's lower, I won't? Or are you looking at that in the context of the assets and their functional operations? And I guess the last part of the question is, do any of the tool vendors you're working with provide decision support around that to help you make those decisions, whether to patch or not to patch, or to defer the patch?
I can answer first for that. We definitely, so a little bit of everything that you mentioned just now does go into the processes around patching, but one of the key things that has helped us do this more effectively is the work we do with the vendors themselves, because a lot of the systems that we do need to patch are proprietary, are very key to our operations. And so part of that entire automation was also to look at how we review the patches in the first place. So I think a key component of it is not working in silo. And of course, we work very closely with the sites themselves to identify sort of where the dependencies are and what we have to pay attention to. So the entire deployment has been long because of that. I think a lot of the work goes around defining what those criteria are, what we require from the vendors and what the vendors require from us to be able to make that patching as efficient as possible, and deploying that automation to the sites, and there are a lot of sites. So I think it's a combination of many different things, and a lot of it also, we learned some hard lessons as we went along, as well as to how to do things more effectively in that environment. And fundamentally, it actually came down to a lot of communication. So whether it was with the teams on the ground, whether it was within the cybersecurity teams themselves, or with the vendor, I think those were the things that really ultimately provided us the kind of clarity we need to push that kind of process forward in a more regular manner. Because it was happening before, it was just not happening in the most efficient way possible.
Yeah, that communication and the stakeholder buy-in that you talked about, anytime you're rolling out a new technology, and I've seen this before many times in the process automation industry, that is key. If you don't get the buy-in from the people that are going to be using this technology, and you're not having those lines of communication open, you're going to have problems. Do we have another question out here?
No, just a little follow-up on that, because I think you're right about the communications being key with the operations folks, because they know what is safe and what isn't.
Correct.
But there was a second part of my question. Do any of the tools, either the vendors that are here or any of the other vendors, help with some of that decision-making criteria? In other words, taking a look at, okay, these are the new vulnerabilities we're aware of, these are the CVSS scores, these are the vendors. How do I make a good decision as to whether I should even consider patching or not?
So yes, we are able to look at the CVSS scores that are listed in the dashboard that comes for Verve. And we're able to see what our vendors have validated as patches that we can apply. And we're able to go back to them and say, why haven't you validated this CVE? Because this score is this high, and we can go back and request that they look at that and come back with a good opportunity in order to fix that going forward. So we do use the tool to identify critical CVEs that have not been validated by the vendors. Our DCS engineers are not going to deploy anything that is going to harm their environment, and if it's not validated, it's going to be an argument to get them to do that, and it is much easier to go back to the vendor and say, I need you to validate this so we can move forward.
Could I just follow up on that? I'm going down here, but, when I just happened to interview the two CEOs who were on the screen up on the stage there. And when I was interviewing John Livingston, I asked John about some new initiatives and things, and I'm not trying to promote John or anything here, I'm just trying to understand.
Go for it, Sid. Love you. Go for it.
I apologize. It seems that way. It's not. No, but it had to do with, a lot of companies, everybody, most people I talk to, we all realize the CVSS scores are good, but not, it all depends on context. There's a lot more to go into what's really important and what's not important. And I appreciate, you also have the other issues you just mentioned, which you have to make sure the vendor thinks it's important. Does a vendor have, all those kinds of things are in there. Anyhow, John, if you could comment about risk, because you implied, or you mentioned in our interview about doing something on that.
So as Leah mentioned, all of the, the vulnerabilities we'll identify will have a CVE for it, CVSS, et cetera. But then for every asset, we're creating a risk score for that asset. So that includes not just, okay, is it patched or not? Is there vulnerabilities, et cetera, which there always are. But what is the criticality of that asset? And that criticality comes to not just what that asset is and what it does, but to the point, what can it connect to today? What flows are going through there? So that HMI can connect to these things and it can do certain things to those PLCs. Okay, that is a critical asset. That network device critical. So basically looking at the asset criticality, but then going beyond just a vulnerability score, but also looking at, well, is there other mitigating measures in that environment that would then bring down that risk score? So for instance, well, I haven't patched it, I haven't patched the WannaCry patch, but I have SMB disabled. Or I've got a vulnerability on a Cisco box that is an HTTPS vulnerability, but the configuration of that device is such that HTTPS is shut down or something. Being able to look at that, or there's a firewall above it with the following rules. Essentially what a security management platform like ours does is it takes all that data and then tries to turn it into insight about a risk to the asset. So you can make an informed judgment of, okay, that one, I really got to patch, versus that one, well, I've got a number of mitigating controls, and oh, by the way, it hasn't been approved by the vendor yet, so I need to take some time. That prioritization problem, right, is a really challenging one. And so we have essentially an analytics platform to do that. And what I said to you is, what we're pushing further and further on is how do you use more advanced analytics, AI type things to do a better job of prioritizing those risks, essentially.
The great thing is the engineers don't have to wait for me to tell them. They can view these dashboards on their own, and they reach out on their own to the vendors to say, this is what you're doing. Now, at some point, I am going to look at something and say, why haven't we addressed this? And then they'll have a better answer for me rather than me having to go and track them down every time I turn around.
Yeah, one reason I ask it is because, I'm a big person on resources, and that's a big issue. There aren't enough people, not enough time, and if you can, you can go and patch everything, and I understand the constraints on doing that, and everybody would say, I'd like to do it, but do you want to spend all your resources patching things that nobody can get to anyhow?
Exactly.
That's kind of, and John, by the way, my PhD is in artificial intelligence, so I'm glad to talk to you about
Get your
that
card
sometime.
afterwards, Sid.
AI is the future, right? It's the past too, right? Anyway, I have a question. and it's for the two end users. But I have a whole bunch of dialogue first that I need to get to be able to get to the questions. I've been working in the OT market space for at least 25 years from a security perspective, similar to John and team. And one of the things that I've seen is that we go forward, we go backwards, go forward, we go backwards, and we've gone from passive to active controls. Verve is clearly doing active controls, as an example. What I see is that we then go to integrated, and then from integrated we go to automated. And if we see that's actually the trend that we've seen in IT security, which is we have API integrations between multiple different vendors and multiple different products to be able to move to security orchestration, automation, and response. And in the OT side, it really becomes this people and process and culture changes that we need to make. And it seems like the two businesses have done a really good job at bringing people together, changing processes, and impacting culture for a very positive way. The tool set use that you're using is amazing because I think the tool itself continues to bring people together. So the question really comes down to it is that where we are now is moving OT security from passive, where we've been listening to a whole bunch of different things, to really being actively participating and being able to put security in place. When do you think that you'll get to, in your businesses, to integrated and then to automated? Because I think we then have to go back to that people and process thing. I don't think we're going to get the engineering trust relative to automated for a period of time. But, and here's the but, if the tools, and I know that Verve can do this and other tools can do this, and I think we're going to have to build trust in it, is that if we have the ability of understanding the vulnerabilities, we understand the impact to the business if we accidentally, if we need to patch those vulnerabilities and do it automated. Do you think that we can get to an automated world where we're doing automated dynamic firewall policy changes, automated segmentation, micro-segmentation, macro-segmentation? And when I'm talking about macro segmentation, many people in the room may not understand what macro segmentation is today, but I'll define it. Segmentation is typical segmentation that we see. Micro segmentation is host isolation, and macro segmentation is process segmentation on the hosts themselves. I don't see OT engineers accepting macro segmentation anywhere in the near future because you're messing with my hosts. But as you're building this trust, do you believe that we can get to that automated world, and how many years do you think it's going to take for us to get to that automated world? Because honestly think that we're in that direction. And do you guys agree that we're in that direction?
Everybody remember the
Another great
question?
You stick around for my next session. You ask good questions.
It seems like
Somebody should just say yes.
Seems like a zero trust question.
It is. So actually, funny that John should mention that. So the thing with zero trust is we're pretty confident we're not going to get to zero. I think it's just, so I'm going to answer the question in a very roundabout kind of way. So one of the things that we did, because our cybersecurity journey is pretty new in that sense, or it's only a couple of years long, we've actually been trying to measure our maturity, right? And one of the things that and this is a very familiar maturity model, I think, to many of who have had to do this. So, you go from being reactive to define to manage to optimize, right? And for us, I think the ideal scenario is being managed. That's the proactive and resiliency that we talk about a lot. And the idea is putting investments into place that will give us enough coverage and enough security, but allow us to operate without having to, reassess everything every 5 minutes. And so, which is why the zero trust concept as a concept is amazing, but we also think it's foolhardy to aim for 100% of that, right? And in the same way that going, fully augmented or integrated is an amazing idea. Like my dream world would be that. It would be, I'd still have a job hopefully at that point. But the idea being is that at this point in time, it's probably not necessary. I think for us, we're still trying to figure out what's an effective way to get to active monitoring in our OT environments without disrupting operations, given what we can already do with the passive technology. So I do think for us, we're definitely years out from going anywhere near augmented, but it may not be given what we do have in place because, the defense in depth concept, which is a word everybody throws around, but is equally important, making sure that we have coverage across the stack and across the board, will help us get to where we need to be without having to get to an augmented or an integrated environment. That said, I would love to go there. I just don't think it's a necessity given our environment where we are at this point. Yeah, still not zero.
Good answer.
So from a Nurion standpoint, we have a 6 to 10-year maturity roadmap. Segmentation is on it to a degree, but maybe not to the degree you are talking about. I really don't want to go into too much depth of how we are setting up our networks or what it is that we're implementing, but I don't know that the OT environment is going to be ready for it in the next 6 years.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in all of these things. Most OT customers are not ready to fully automate security decisions. The one exception for us is some of our DoD customers, but they have a little bit different risk kind of profile. To us, some of the automation is actually to deal with the shades of gray. Access control, we try and make it black and white as much as we can. This user is allowed to access that thing. But sometimes you have a legitimate user, but they logged in from Lagos, the first time they've ever logged in from outside the United States. Well, do they still deserve the same level of access? Maybe they're visiting family there, who knows? But you might ask for an additional level of authorization. You might be applying algorithms to decide whether, is there somebody who travels a lot or not? There is a place for automation in handling some of those shades of gray problems. We all know how nervous people are about accidentally shutting themselves down. And I think if you told them the AI shut you down, you'd probably get one of your limbs removed for your trouble. So we're not in a hurry to go there.
Yeah. No, we are not. And so I do have to say that our maturity roadmap changes every 3 months. So we may have a 6-year maturity roadmap, but I make changes to it every quarter based on the new technologies are coming out or the risk appetite that comes out based on whatever assessment we're doing.
One more question. We got time for one more.
So there's been a lot of talk about patching, which I think we all connect to. What I saw in one line in one slide was dealing with dormant or inactive user accounts or service accounts or whatever. Those can be particularly difficult. They could be an Active Directory account. They could be a local device or server account. They could authenticate with Radius or Tactics or a lot of different ways. Have you tackled how to identify if an account's in use and where and for what?
Yes.
And then follow up how?
Well, Verve is actually great about identifying the accounts that we have in our environment and when they were last accessed. And we are able to go back to the various different sites and say, what are you doing with these accounts? Why do we need them? And remove them.
So maybe you can expand on that a little bit. So what I'm looking for is, can you tell me what service on what device for a Windows account used it last, get the Active Directory
Yes.
last log on, read Tactics or Radius logs, all that?
Yes.
Okay, so given that, why do you need to go back to the site then? You should have what you need, other than for verification.
Well, because we have an agreement with the site that we will not impact their production in any way, and that they touch their own equipment. We just identify what is wrong. I'm a business partner to them, not somebody who actually touches their equipment.
Right, so put it a different way, you're highly confident in the use case for that account when you go to them, correct?
Yes, when I go to them, it's not a what do you think? It's remove it. So,
Good, thank you.
yeah.
Anybody else have a comment? I think we're at the end of the session. Thank you to our presenters and panelists. Great questions and great answers and a great discussion. So thanks for attending, and
Thank you, everyone.
we really appreciate it.
Great talking with you. Thank you.
We're going to have another case study session in here at 4 o'clock, so please stick around if you can. And we have, drinks and coffee out in the lobby right now.